I paid my family's bills for years. Then they kicked me out and called me selfish, and then Over the years, there have been so many moments where I felt pushed aside. Holidays where Mark's family got all the attention while I sat quietly on the sidelines. Birthdays where he'd get the expensive gifts while I got something practical, like socks or a new coat. I told myself it didn't matter. That's just how parents are, I thought. Besides, I had always been independent. I didn't need the fanfare or attention. When Mark got married to Becky and had his first son, Jason, things shifted even more. Suddenly, Mark was no longer just the favorite. He was Asterisk, the one who gave us grandkids. My parents were over the moon, as if their lives were complete now that they could proudly call themselves grandparents. I was happy for him, too, but I couldn't help but feel a little invisible in my own family. Still, I shrugged it off because, as I've always told myself, family helps family. Now here's where it all started to spiral. At the end of last year, Mark lost his job. He worked as a manager for a small retail chain, and when the company started closing locations, his store was one of the first to go. It sucked. I really did feel bad for him. I remember Becky calling my parents in tears, worried about how they'd manage with just her part-time income at the bakery. Mark wasn't the best with savings. Shocking, I know. So losing his paycheck hit them hard. But rather than helping him figure out a real plan to get back on his feet, my parents' solution was to invite him, Becky, and their 2 kids to move into the house. On paper, it might sound reasonable. They have space, and family sticks together in tough times. The problem? That space they so graciously offered was mine. It happened on a Sunday night. I'd just gotten home from a long work trip, exhausted, craving nothing but a shower and my own bed. As soon as I walked through the door, I knew something was up. My parents were waiting for me at the kitchen table. Mom with her usual concerned face, Dad quiet as always, fiddling with his watch. "Sarah, honey, we need to talk," Mom said. I dropped my bag by the door and sat down, suddenly on edge. Mom didn't beat around the bush. "You know how hard things have been for your brother since he lost his job. He's got Becky and the kids to worry about, and they really don't have anywhere else to go." I felt my heart sink. I already knew where this was headed. "So, where are they going to stay?" I asked, even though I knew the answer before the words left my mouth. Mom smiled like she'd rehearsed it 100 times. "The basement suite is perfect for them. It's separate from the main house, so they'll have their privacy. Becky and the kids will be comfortable there." I blinked at her, trying to process. "Wait, my basement suite? Where am I supposed to go?" Dad finally chimed in, though his voice was quieter. "We've set up the hobby room for you. It's cozy. You'll have plenty of space." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The hobby room was a glorified closet. It was where Mom kept her sewing machine, stacks of fabric, half-finished crafts, and bins of holiday decorations. It wasn't even a bedroom. "You're kidding, right?" I said, hoping this was some bizarre joke. Mom's tone shifted, turning defensive. "It's only temporary, Sarah. Besides, this is our house, and we need to make decisions that benefit the family as a whole. You'll be fine in the hobby room for now." There it was. That classic phrase, "It's our house." The conversation ended with me sitting there in stunned silence while my parents patted themselves on the back for being helpful and generous. I didn't argue much. What was the point? Mark was moving in whether I liked it or not. My space, my comfort, didn't matter. I spent that night packing up my essentials, clothes, toiletries, my laptop. I stared at my little basement suite, the place I'd made into my home over the past few years. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I had shelves full of books, cozy blankets on the couch, my favorite scented candles. Now all of it was being ripped away from me to accommodate Mark and his family. The worst part was that they didn't even ask. There was no conversation, no family meeting. "No, Sarah, how do you feel about this?" It was just decided for me, like my feelings didn't matter at all. By the next morning, I knew I couldn't stay. Not in the hobby room. Not in a house where I was clearly just a supporting character in someone else's story. So I made a plan. For the 2 weeks I had off between work trips, I booked an affordable, all-inclusive resort in the Florida Keys. It wasn't fancy, but it was cheaper than paying $1,600 in rent and groceries for a place I didn't even live in anymore. Plus, it came with peace and quiet, two things I desperately needed. When I told my parents about my plan, they didn't seem to care much. Mom even said, "Well, if that's what you need to do." It wasn't until I left that the real drama began. 2 days into my stay at the resort, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Mom. "Mom, hey Sarah, where's the money for rent and groceries this month? We're counting on it to help support Mark and the kids." I stared at the message, speechless. Surely she wasn't serious. I called her back, and the conversation went something like this. "Mom, I don't live there anymore. Why would I pay rent?" "Because we're still a family, Sarah. You know we're all in a bind right now, and Mark needs that space more than you do. But you gave away my space. I'm not even there." Dad got on the phone then, his voice more forceful than usual. "You can't just leave your family hanging like this. We raised you better than that." It was like talking to a wall. No matter what I said, they kept hammering the same point. I was selfish. I was abandoning my family. Mark's struggles were my responsibility too. Then Mark chimed in over the phone. "Sarah, you don't understand. I have a family to take care of. You don't need the space like we do." I snapped. "Mark, when you had your job, did you ever send Mom and Dad money to help out?" "No. You spent it all on yourself. So why am I supposed to bail you out now?" That shut him up for a moment. By the time the call ended, I was shaking with anger. For years, I'd been the one holding everything together. Helping my parents, paying bills, being the responsible one. And for what? To be kicked out of my own space and called selfish for putting my foot down? That's when I realized something. This wasn't about helping my family anymore. It was about control. They expected me to play a role I never signed up for, and when I refused, they turned on me. I sent Mom $400 for groceries out of guilt, but that was it. I wasn't going to keep funding their lives at the expense of my own. What I didn't realize then was that this was just the beginning. My decision to stand up for myself would send shockwaves through the entire family, and the backlash would be unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It didn't take long for things to unravel after I refused to keep paying for a place I no longer lived in. If I thought the guilt trip during that first phone call was bad, I had no idea just how far my parents, and the rest of my family, would go to keep me in line. The all-inclusive resort in the Florida Keys was supposed to be my reprieve, a chance to breathe and clear my head. For once, I wasn't paying $1,600 a month to live in a basement suite I'd been evicted from. The little bungalow I rented had everything I needed: a pool view, decent food, and, most importantly, peace. It felt like a taste of freedom. Freedom I hadn't even realized I'd been craving for years. But that peace didn't last long. On the third day of my stay, my phone buzzed relentlessly with texts and missed calls. "Mom, Sarah, we're disappointed in you. This isn't what family does. Dad, it's not fair to leave us hanging like this. Mark, do you even care about anyone but yourself?" Each message hit me like a jab. My parents were relentless, and it was clear Mark had joined their campaign to wear me down. I didn't reply to any of them at first. I told myself I needed space, that they'd calm down eventually, but the texts kept coming. Then the phone calls started. At one point, I picked up out of sheer frustration, only to be met with Mark's voice on the other end. "You know what you're doing to Mom and Dad, right?" His tone was accusatory, like he'd rehearsed it. "They're struggling. The house is too expensive, and now they're trying to help me and my family. You're making it worse by leaving. I don't get how you can be so selfish." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Selfish?" I repeated, trying to stay calm. "You took my space, Mark. I'm not even living there anymore. Why would I keep paying for something I don't have?" "It's not about space, Sarah. It's about family. I have kids to think about, and you don't. You should be helping out more, not running away." The audacity of it was stunning. Here was my brother, who'd spent years mismanaging his money, telling me I owed it to him, owed it to his kids, to fund their lives. I hung up. That was the only response I could muster at the time. By the end of the week, I was starting to feel like I couldn't escape. My parents might have been 1,000 miles away in Riverside, but their words followed me everywhere. Every time I checked my phone, there was another message waiting for me. The tone varied. Sometimes guilt, sometimes anger, sometimes a weird combination of both. "Mom, Sarah, think of Jason and Liam. They're just little boys. Do you really want them to suffer because you're being stubborn? Dad, you owe it to us. We took care of you when you were younger. Now it's your turn. Mark, you'll regret this when the kids remember how their aunt turned her back on them. It wasn't just the texts either. My extended family got involved. I started getting calls from people I hadn't spoken to in years. My Aunt Linda, Uncle Gary, and even cousins I barely knew. Sarah, honey, Aunt Linda cooed during one call. I'm sure you don't mean to upset your parents like this. They've done so much for you. Can't you just help a little longer? Mark really needs it right now. I wanted to scream. A little longer? I thought bitterly. How long was a little longer? Another month? A year? Forever? No one seemed to care that I'd already been paying more than my fair share for years. The final straw came the day after I returned from the Keys. I'd just finished unpacking when there was a knock on the door of my small apartment in Columbus. I opened it, and there stood my parents. Mom looked exhausted but determined, a thick folder clutched in her hands. Dad, as usual, said nothing, though his presence loomed like a silent threat. Mom? Dad? What are you doing here? I asked, completely stunned. We need to talk, Mom said, brushing past me and walking into the living room. Dad followed her, and I had no choice but to let them in. They sat down on my couch like they owned the place. Mom opened the folder and started spreading out papers on the coffee table. I recognized what they were immediately: utility bills, repair estimates, grocery receipts. Sarah, she started, we can't do this without you. Look at these expenses. The mortgage is still due, the roof needs repairs before winter, and Mark's kids need school supplies. We need your help. I stared at her, stunned. I'm not living there anymore. Why should I pay for any of this? Because you're part of this family, Dad snapped, finally speaking. And family sticks together when times are tough. You don't just run off because things get hard. I felt my frustration boiling over. You didn't ask me, Dad. You didn't ask how I felt about giving up my space. You just decided for me. And now you want me to keep paying for it? That's insane. Mom's voice softened, but the manipulation was clear as day. Honey, think of Jason and Liam. They don't understand why their aunt isn't helping. We just want to keep this family together. That was the moment it clicked for me. This wasn't about the mortgage, or groceries, or even Mark's kids. This was about control. My parents had always expected me to be the good one, the responsible daughter who would keep everything afloat. And now that I wasn't playing along, they didn't know how to handle it. I stood up, pointing toward the door. I think you should go. Mom's eyes widened. Sarah? No. I'm serious. You need to go. For the first time, Dad looked genuinely surprised. I don't think they ever expected me to push back. We're just trying to do what's best for the family, Mom said as they shuffled toward the door. I didn't respond. I shut the door behind them and locked it. Then I sat on the couch, shaking. That night, I lay awake thinking about everything. My family's expectations. My own needs. The years I'd spent being the good daughter, quietly sacrificing my own financial freedom so they could live comfortably. It hit me then. I'd been enabling this dynamic for years. The second I started earning money, they started depending on me. And the more I gave, the more they expected. It wasn't my fault that Mark had mismanaged his life, and it wasn't my responsibility to fix it. But breaking free wasn't going to be easy. My parents weren't just going to back off because I told them to. If I wanted my life back, I was going to have to fight for it. That's when I made a decision. I'd keep helping them, a little when I could, but I wouldn't let them control me anymore. I wouldn't pay for a house I didn't live in. I wouldn't fund Mark's mortgage or his kids' school supplies. And I wouldn't feel guilty for saying no. The next morning, I sent Mom one last text. Me, I love you, but I can't keep paying for everything. I'll help when I can, but I'm not an ATM. Please respect that. The response came minutes later. Mom, I can't believe you're doing this to us, Sarah. We're family. I didn't reply. For the first time in years, I felt like I was taking back control of my life. After my parents' unannounced visit and the barrage of guilt-tripping texts, I thought, naively, that I'd seen the worst of it. That maybe, just maybe, they'd give me some space to breathe. I was wrong. It turns out that standing up for yourself and my family is the equivalent of declaring war. It doesn't just cause a ripple, it causes a full-on tsunami. And in true Evans family fashion, the next phase of this war was a virtual family meeting, the kind where everyone with a phone and an opinion got a front row seat to my crucifixion. It started with an email. Mom, Sarah, we've scheduled a family meeting for this Sunday at 3 p.m. It's important. Your aunts, uncles, and cousins will be there. Please don't miss it. That please was the most passive-aggressive thing I'd ever read. A whole family meeting? I couldn't believe it. Were they seriously assembling the entire extended family to shame me? Did they think a group ambush would somehow fix me? I almost didn't log in. I thought about ignoring it entirely and letting them all yell into the void. But deep down, I knew that skipping it would only fuel their narrative. Sarah's avoiding us because she knows she's wrong. So, with a sinking feeling in my gut, I set an alarm for 2:55 p.m. and logged into the video call. The screen loaded, and there they all were. My parents, my brother Mark, Aunt Linda, Uncle Gary, my cousin Rachel, and a few other relatives who only ever appeared during Christmas dinners and weddings. I scanned the squares on the screen, and it was clear from the tight-lipped expressions that I was about to face the firing squad. Mom was the first to speak, and she didn't waste any time. Sarah, we're all here because we're concerned about you and the decisions you've been making lately. Her voice dripped with faux concern, like I was a lost child instead of a grown adult who dared to prioritize herself. I stayed silent, waiting for whatever speech they'd prepared. The next half hour was a blur of accusations and guilt tripping from every corner of the screen. Aunt Linda, Sarah, we're all family here. You can't just turn your back when people are struggling. Mark and the kids need support right now. We all pitch in when times are tough. Uncle Gary, your parents have done everything for you. Now, when it's your turn to step up, you're acting like it's too much to ask. Family comes first. Cousin Rachel, I get wanting to be independent, but you don't just cut off your family. That's not how we were raised. And then, of course, Mark chimed in. Do you know how hard it is for Becky and me right now? The kids don't understand why their aunt suddenly doesn't care about them. Jason asked me the other day why you don't want to see them anymore. What am I supposed to tell him? That one hit hard. I love my nephews, but Mark knew exactly what he was doing. He was weaponizing them against me, twisting the situation to make me look like some heartless monster. Finally, after what felt like hours, they let me speak. My hands were shaking, but I took a deep breath and unmuted myself. Look, asterisk, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Asterisk, I love this family. I do. And I've been helping for years, paying rent, paying for groceries, doing whatever I could to keep things running. But this is too much. Mom's face hardened, but I pressed on. I'm not living at the house anymore. You gave my space away without even asking me, and now you're expecting me to keep paying for it? That's not fair. You're all acting like I'm abandoning you, but I'm just trying to take care of myself for once. The room fell silent. I could see Mom shaking her head, already preparing her rebuttal, but I wasn't finished. Mark, I said, staring directly at his video square. You're my brother, and I care about you. But you've never been responsible with your money. When you had a job, did you send money to Mom and Dad to help out? No. You spent it on yourself. And now, when you're in trouble, suddenly I'm the bad guy for not bailing you out. Mark's face flushed red, but he didn't argue. And the rest of you, I continued, looking at my extended family. Where were you when I was the one keeping everything afloat? None of you had anything to say when I was paying $1,600 a month for a basement suite. I only lived in half the time. But the second I draw a boundary, suddenly I'm selfish. The silence that followed was deafening. Aunt Linda looked scandalized. Uncle Gary was frowning, and my mom was on the verge of tears. Dad sat there with his arms crossed, refusing to meet my eyes. Finally, Mom broke the silence. Sarah, we just don't understand why you're acting like this. This isn't like you. That was it. The final straw. This is me, Mom. I'm just not the doormat you've gotten used to. I didn't wait for a response. I clicked leave meeting and shut my laptop with a satisfying thud. The text started immediately. Mom, you didn't have to humiliate us like that, Sarah. We were trying to have a conversation. Mark, you've changed. I hope you're happy leaving your family behind. Aunt Linda, I can't believe how disrespectful you were to your parents. I ignored all of them. I didn't owe them an explanation. Not anymore. But even though I felt justified, I couldn't help the gnawing guilt in my stomach. Growing up, I'd always been the good one, the responsible daughter who never caused trouble. Standing up for myself felt foreign, like I was breaking some sacred family rule. That night, I sat on my couch with a glass of wine and tried to process everything. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't just about money or space. It was about control. My family had spent years relying on me, assuming I'd always fall in line. The moment I stepped out of that role, they turned on me. I didn't regret what I said in the meeting. If anything, it felt like the first honest thing I'd said to them in years. But I knew the worst wasn't over. My family wasn't going to back down quietly. They were just getting started. After the family meeting, I hoped things would calm down. Maybe I was delusional, but I thought that, just maybe, the shock of me finally standing up for myself would make them back off. Give me space. Give themselves time to reflect. I was wrong. If anything, my refusal to give in only turned up the heat. It was as if I'd poked the proverbial bear, and now it was clawing back with everything it had. My family didn't see boundaries as something to respect. They saw them as challenges to overcome. The guilt trips got sharper, the manipulation got bolder, and the attempts to drag me back into the fold turned downright invasive. It happened a few days after the family meeting. I was just wrapping up a client report when my coworker, Sam, popped his head into my office. Hey, Sarah. Some woman called reception asking for you. Said she was your mom. She left a message with Emily, but I think you should hear it. My stomach dropped. I followed him to reception, where Emily handed me a sticky note with a puzzled look on her face. Message. This is Nancy Evans, Sarah's mother. We're going through a tough time, and I need to discuss some urgent family matters that might be affecting her focus at work. Please encourage her to step up. Thank you. I froze, staring at the note like it might catch fire in my hands. My mom had called my workplace. My workplace. Not to check on me, not because there was an emergency, but to leave a message suggesting I wasn't pulling my weight for the family. I felt humiliated, furious. My face burned as I crumpled up the note. Sam gave me an awkward smile. Everything okay? I nodded stiffly. Yeah, it's fine. Just family stuff. But it wasn't fine. I called my mom the second I got home that evening. Why would you call my work, Mom? That's completely out of line. She sounded indignant, like I was the unreasonable one. I had to get your attention somehow. You're not listening to us, Sarah. Maybe hearing it from someone at work will help you see how serious this is. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My work has nothing to do with you, or Mark, or your bills. You can't drag my professional life into this. Mom didn't even hesitate. We're your family. We come first. You need to start acting like it. No, I said firmly. I don't. I need you to respect my boundaries, and I need you to leave my job out of this. Boundaries? She scoffed. This isn't about boundaries, Sarah. This is about family loyalty. You're abandoning us, and you don't even see it. I hung up. There was no point in arguing. My mom was so deep in her own narrative that nothing I said would change her mind. The next day, I woke up to a slew of notifications. I didn't even need to check my phone to know who it was. Sure enough, my brother Mark had taken to Facebook. His first post was vague, just enough to stir up sympathy without giving away details. Mark Evans. In tough times, you find out who your real family is. Some people forget where they came from when it's inconvenient for them. We're doing the best we can, but it's hard when some people won't step up. The comments poured in. Stay strong, Mark. You've got this. Family is everything. Whoever's letting you down will regret it one day. You don't need toxic people in your life. Focus on your beautiful family. The kicker, though, was a direct message from Mark himself. Mark, Jason keeps asking why you don't visit anymore. Do you want me to tell him the truth, that his aunt doesn't care about him? I sat there, staring at my phone, equal parts furious and heartbroken. I hated how Mark weaponized his kids against me, knowing how much I loved them. But I also knew this was classic Mark. Play the victim, gather sympathy, and make me out to be the villain. I refused to reply. I wasn't going to play his game. It was only a matter of time before my parents tried something else. I should have expected it. That Saturday morning, I was sipping coffee and enjoying a rare quiet moment when there was a knock at my door. My heart sank as I peered through the peephole. There they were, Mom and Dad, standing on my doorstep with a manila folder in Mom's hand. I debated not answering. I could have pretended I wasn't home, but I knew they wouldn't leave. I took a deep breath and opened the door. "What are you doing here?" I asked. Mom didn't even wait for an invitation. She brushed past me, Dad trailing behind her. They sat down on my couch, as if they owned the place, and Mom pulled out the folder. "We need to talk about finances," she said, spreading out bills and receipts on my coffee table. I rubbed my temples. "Mom, we've been through this. I'm not paying for a house I don't live in anymore." "Sarah, you don't understand," Dad said, his voice tense. "We're struggling. Mark's struggling. The roof needs to be fixed before winter, and there are school fees for Jason and Liam. It's not just about you." I snapped. "It's always about me, Dad. It's about what I can give, what I can pay for, what sacrifices I can make to keep everyone else comfortable. Well, I'm done. I'm not your ATM, and I'm not responsible for Mark's problems." Mom's voice cracked as she shot back. "We're not asking for much, Sarah. Just $2,000 a month to help with the basics. Is that really so unreasonable?" I stared at her, stunned. "You think $2,000 a month is not much? Are you hearing yourself right now?" The conversation spiraled from there. Every time I tried to explain my side, they fired back with guilt and blame. "After everything we've done for you, family is supposed to help each other. Mark has kids to think about, Sarah. You don't understand because you're single." Eventually, I'd had enough. I stood up and pointed to the door. "You need to leave." Mom stared at me like I'd slapped her. "Sarah, now." Dad muttered something under his breath, but they gathered their things and left, slamming the door behind them. Once they were gone, I sank onto the couch, feeling like I'd run a marathon. My head was pounding, and my chest felt tight. I couldn't stop replaying the argument in my mind. My mom's tears, my dad's disappointment, the way they made me feel like I was failing them. But deep down, I knew I wasn't. I was just tired. Tired of being the one who always had to fix things. Tired of being the good daughter who sacrificed everything for everyone else. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, alternating between anger and sadness. The constant manipulation, the guilt, the pressure. It was all getting to me. For the first time, I realized that this wasn't just a temporary conflict. This was a cycle, one that would never end unless I broke it. That night, as I lay in bed, I made a promise to myself. I would not let them drag me back in. No matter how hard they pushed, no matter how much they tried to guilt me, I would stand firm. I owed it to myself to stop being their crutch. But as I'd soon learn, they weren't done yet. Not by a long shot. After my parents' unannounced visit and their absurd request for $2,000 a month, I thought I'd seen every possible card they could play. I thought I was finally prepared for their emotional manipulations and guilt trips. I told myself that standing firm would be enough to make them back off. But the thing about people who thrive on control is that they don't give up easily. They escalate. The next week was like living in a pressure cooker. It didn't take long for my parents to spread the story far and wide. How their selfish daughter was abandoning them in their time of need. I didn't realize just how far they'd gone until I started getting calls and texts from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. First, it was my Uncle Gary again, always the family peacemaker. "Uncle Gary, Sarah, your mom called me crying. She's heartbroken about everything that's happening. I get that you're upset, but can't you just compromise a little? Family is more important than pride." I stared at my phone, jaw clenched. How did this become about pride? Was it pride to not want to fund someone else's mortgage while living out of a suitcase half the month? Then came a message from my cousin Rachel, the one who loves sticking her nose where it doesn't belong. "Rachel, not to be rude, but this is kind of crazy, Sarah. You're just, letting your brother and his kids suffer. That's cold. I didn't think you were like that." It didn't matter what the truth was. My parents had crafted their own version of events. A story where I was the villain who'd abandoned her family, who cared more about money than her poor brother and his innocent children. They turned me into the black sheep overnight, and it worked. Of course, my brother Mark didn't miss his chance to fan the flames. His social media posts became more frequent, more pointed. Mark's Facebook post. Some people say they care about family, but when times get tough, they're nowhere to be found. I'll do whatever it takes to keep my kids happy, even if it means carrying this weight alone. I ignored it. But then my phone buzzed with a notification from a group chat my cousins and I shared. Rachel had posted a screenshot of Mark's latest post, adding, "Rachel, yikes. He's talking about you, isn't he?" The humiliation burned through me. Mark knew exactly what he was doing. He was framing himself as the struggling hero, the father who never gives up, while painting me as the heartless, selfish sister who refused to help. His friends and random acquaintances flooded the comments with sympathy and encouragement. No one knew the truth. And Mark? He didn't care. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, my mother crossed another line. It happened on Tuesday morning. I was in the middle of a conference call when my boss, Tom, knocked on my office door. He looked uncomfortable. "Sarah, can I talk to you for a minute?" I muted my call and nodded, feeling dread settle in my stomach. Tom closed the door behind him and sat down across from me. "Your mom called the office again," he said carefully. "She didn't speak to me directly, but she left a message with reception." I felt my face flush with embarrassment. "I'm so sorry. I'll handle it." Tom held up his hand. "It's okay. Family stuff happens. I just wanted to make sure everything's all right. If there's something you need time off for, just let me know." "There's nothing going on," I said quickly, my voice sharp. I hated that my mom had dragged my professional life into her mess. "I'll make sure it doesn't happen again." Tom nodded and left, but the damage was done. I felt humiliated. I sat at my desk for a long time, staring blankly at my computer screen. How does she? My work was the one place I'd managed to keep separate from my family's chaos, and now she was invading that too. By the end of the week, I was emotionally drained. The texts, the phone calls, the gossip, everything felt relentless. I couldn't go a single day without someone trying to mediate or guilt-trip me back into submission. My parents were pushing harder, my brother was weaponizing his kids, and the rest of the family had taken sides. And then the final blow came. Another unannounced visit. It was Saturday afternoon. I'd just finished cleaning my apartment when I heard a knock on the door. My heart sank. I didn't need to look through the peephole to know who it was. I opened the door to find Mark standing there, his arms crossed, a scowl on his face. "Mark, what are you doing here?" He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "We need to talk, Sarah. This has gone on long enough." I crossed my arms and blocked the doorway. "No, Mark. We don't need to talk. You need to leave. You don't get to just walk away from your family," he said, his voice rising. "Jason and Liam don't understand why their aunt doesn't care about them anymore. You're breaking Mom and Dad's hearts. You're breaking mine." Something inside me snapped. "No, Mark. I'm not the one who walked away. You did that when you decided it was my responsibility to clean up your mess. When you decided I owed you something just because I worked hard and made better choices. I'm done carrying you." Mark looked stunned, like no one had ever spoken to him that way before. For once, he had no comeback. "Go home, Mark," I said quietly. "Take care of your own family. I'm done." I closed the door in his face. For a moment, I stood there, shaking, half expecting him to knock again or yell through the door. But he didn't. I heard his footsteps retreating, and a wave of exhaustion crashed over me. That night, I sat on my couch, staring at the wall. I thought about everything that had happened over the last few months. The eviction from my basement suite, the endless guilt trips, the invasion of my workplace, the lies Mark spread online. It wasn't just that my family was asking for help. It was that they felt entitled to it, to my money, to my time, to my life. And when I dared to say no, they'd made it their mission to punish me for it. I realized then that I had a choice. I could keep fighting this losing battle, or I could walk away. The next morning, I called my friend Jessica, one of the only people who'd been in my corner through all of this. "Jess, I'm moving," I said. "Moving? Where?" "I don't know yet. Out of state, somewhere far. I need a fresh start." Jessica didn't hesitate. Good. You deserve it. Do it for you, Sarah. Over the next 2 weeks, I put the pieces into motion. I applied for a job transfer within my company and started searching for apartments in a city I'd always wanted to visit. Charlotte, North Carolina. It was far enough to give me space, but close enough that I wouldn't feel like I was running away completely. The day I packed up my car and left Columbus, I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell Mark. I left a short note on the kitchen table at my old house. I love you, but I can't keep living this way. I hope you understand one day. I don't know if they ever will. Driving down the highway toward Charlotte, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Grief for the family I'd had to leave behind, anger for the way they treated me, but also relief. For the first time in years, I felt free. Free from guilt. Free from obligations that weren't mine. Free to start over. As the miles stretched out behind me, I realized that I wasn't running away. I was choosing myself. And for once, that was enough.